So my talk today is entitled Loss, Absence and Contestation in Digital Humanities through the lens of the collection of Sir Hans Sloane, who lived from 1660 to 1753. So in September of this year, the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK awarded a total of £14.5 million to 5 research projects to, as they put it, connect the UK's cultural artefacts and historical archives in new and transformative ways. The awards were made as part of a wider 5-year programme called Towards a National Collection, which has been funding research into ways that the disparate collections that are held by the UK's cultural heritage institutions can be explored by public audiences and academic researchers in the future. So I was delighted that the project called the Sloane Lab, looking back to build future shared collections, of which I'm Principal Investigator, was one of the 5 projects to be funded. So the generous grant that we received through this funding call will allow us to hire a number of postdoctoral researchers and to work with a wide range of collaborators. So the project's direct collaborators include the Natural History Museum and the British Museum, where we have co-Is and where we will be able to hire postdocs. And in addition, we will be working in various capacities with the British Library, Historic Environment Scotland, Royal Botanic Garden Edinburgh, National Museums of Scotland, Community Archives and Heritage Group, Down County Museum, National Galleries of Scotland, Oxford University Herbaria, Collecting the West, funded by the Australian Research Council, Metafax, and with my forthcoming move to Germany, I'm really hoping that I can develop more collaborations and contacts with German and projects in the German-speaking world and also cultural heritage institutions. So as you will have gathered from the brief points of orientation that I've just made to you, the project is very new. Some of our job advertisements for postdoctoral colleagues are still open, as a matter of fact. And so I'm not going to present to you any new findings because as such, we don't have findings yet. But I am going to present to you an outline of what it is that we hope to achieve in the next 3 years. And I'm going to bring to your attention some of the completed research that we have done that really scaffolded us towards this bigger project. And most of all, I'm going to discuss with you some of the very big problems around issues of silence, loss, bias, and absence that the project is going to have to contend with. So I'm going to explore these questions in connection with the early modern collection of Sir Hans Sloane, and drawing on the work that my colleagues and I have done, especially Alexander Tullier-Bard and Kim Sloane. But regarding this early modern orientation of my talk, as I hope will become clear in the course of the lecture, I believe that questions about how the digital engages with issues of silence, bias, loss and absence are some of the most pressing of all for the digital humanities. Because it is in the digital humanities response to these issues that we may find that we can at least confront and problematize, if not, or ideally, subvert and contest, not only the subjectivities of early modern archives, but the subjectivities of data and data-driven inquiry itself. So before picking this issue up again a little bit at the end of my talk, let me now tell you more about our new project, its research contexts and its aims. So the AHRC funded Towards a National Collection project entitled the Sloane Lab, Looking Back to Build Future Shared Collections, will, at the most overarching level, aim to devise automated and augmented ways of mending the broken links that currently exist between the past and the present of the museum collections held in the UK by the British Museum, the Natural History Museum, and the British Library. And for this, as I mentioned, we're going to use the collection of Sir Hans Sloane as a microcosm through which to explore the technical, infrastructural, conceptual, historical, and social challenges faced in bringing together digital cultural heritage collections so as to help audiences use, learn, and to benefit from them. So let me back up a little bit then, and I'm sure if you're not already familiar with Sloane, you may be wondering, who was Sloane and why is Sloane's collection, or this early modern collection, why is it a compelling case study for research into the future of digital museum collections and research into collections as data? That, of course, will be conducted in UK context, but hopefully will have an international applicability too. Well, let me start by telling you then a bit more about Sir Hans Sloane. He was born in Northern Ireland in 1660. He was a physician, a naturalist, secretary and later president of the UK's Royal Society, as well as the UK's Royal College of Physicians. And during his lifetime, he amassed an immense collection of some 70,000 items from all over the world. And I've been showing you just a few, a very, very small few of the items here on the screen. So by the time of Sloane's death in 1753, his collection comprised more than 50,000 books and manuscripts, thousands of natural history objects such as fossils and botanical specimens, ethnographic materials, coins, antiquities, hundreds of albums of prints and drawings, and many other treasures. A proportion of this collection was financed by Sloane through the profits of the slave trade. Sloane owned shares in slave trading companies, and he married into a plantation-owning family, as has been recently extensively explored by James Del Burgo. And upon Sloane's death, then, he bequeathed his collection to the British nation, an act that became a catalyst for the British Museum Act of 1753. And with the creation of the Natural History Museum and the British Library out of that original British Museum, Sloane's objects now form the foundational collections of the three cultural heritage institutions of the UK, namely British Museum, Natural History Museum, and British Library, who are of course also important actors on the international cultural heritage stage. So as I said, Sir Hans Sloane's death in 1753 led to the creation of Britain's first cultural heritage collection. Bought on behalf of the nation, his collection was made freely available through the new institution, the British Museum. But anybody who wants to use or interrogate this founding collection today, for example, somebody who wanted to trace provenance data right across the collection, right across the objects that are held in either the British Museum, British Library, and Natural History Museum, will find that this is exceedingly difficult to do, if not impossible, as a matter of fact. Because the collection and the records of the collection are now dispersed across those institutions and recorded in more than 5 digital cataloguing systems that reflect the different needs of different disciplines and different institutional histories. We currently have no single accessible catalogue of the original collection or of what exists of it today. Some of the original collection is lost, swapped, discarded, possibly destroyed. Most of Sloane's original handwritten catalogues, which I'll return to talk a little bit more about again in a while, we think they are mostly extant. About 15,000 manuscript pages have been digitally imaged, but not all, and Sloane and his amanuenses would have catalogued his project in different ways. So the overarching aim of this new project then is to digitally reunite the first national collection and the information that describes it in Sloane's early modern manuscript catalogues and in the relevant sections of the present day catalogues of the British Museum, Natural History Museum and British Library and others that have relevant documentation and objects. In doing so, we hope to open the collection up to collections as data approaches, including textual analysis, or really any of the digital methods that can be brought to bear on data once it has been remediated into a digital form, or if already extant in digital form, then any of the techniques that can be brought to bear on data once it has been made machine readable or otherwise computationally tractable. And we very much see the challenges of uniting this first national collection as a microcosm of those faced in bringing together other cultural heritage collections to help audiences to use, learn and benefit from them. There are the technical challenges of selecting, enriching and releasing collections as data, the challenges of helping others search collections for different reasons without needing to know the specialist language of curators, digital humanists or computer scientists, of creating searchable digital collections from handwritten imaged records, and of identifying and visualizing the negative space of gaps and ethical grey areas for all who use these shared digital collections. And it's with the mention of the last aim that we reach the point of the project that I personally am most excited to pursue. And while I was writing the project proposal, this was really what I sort of held at the forefront of my brain and my interest at all times. So a key aim of the project then is to facilitate richer, more critical understandings of the origins and the development of museum collections by devising computational and conceptual approaches to the detection and the exposition of what are often hidden processes like colonialism, empire and slavery that have shaped collections and their classifications. So, as I mentioned, Sloane's collection was created through the economic, political and cultural processes of Britain's increasingly global entanglements in the 17th and 18th centuries, entanglements to which now the digital infrastructure for the 21st century and beyond must respond. So the project will explore how we might develop new computational approaches to the detection and visualization of loss, absence, bias, and to assist publics and cultural heritage organizations to engage with digital technologies in new ways. But let's now turn to look a bit more closely at some of these processes of bias, absence, silence, and so on as they manifest in the Hans Sloane's collection and the records of his collection. So to bring us towards a discussion of this, I'm going to step back a few years and I'm going to tell you about a project that we have recently completed. So this was a collaboration between the British Museum and between UCL. It was funded by the Leverhulme Trust, and it really decisively influenced the project that has now subsequently been funded. And here, so Kim Sloane was the PI, I was the co-I, and then Victoria Pickering, Alexander Tullier-Bard and Martha Fleming were the postdocs on the project, and Deborah Liam was a PhD student on the project. So the work that I'm going to report to you draws on our collaborative work together. So, and if you're interested, 5 of the catalogues that we worked on, we encoded them in TEI XML, and 5 of them are now available on my institutional repository webpage, so you can carry them off and do all sorts of interesting data-led analyses on them. So during his lifetime, Sloane and his amanuenses labelled and described the objects that he collected in some 54 original catalogues, of which about 40 are still extant. And you see an image of some of the catalogues here. These catalogues not only list what was once in Sloane's collection, they also reveal through their descriptions, cross-references, numerical and symbolic codes, page layouts, and so on, the way that Sloane and his contemporaries organised and classified the world as they saw it. Sloane's catalogues are core documents of museum meaning, but before our Leverhulme-funded project, very little work to bring computational approaches to the interrogation of that meaning had been undertaken. So the Enlightenment Architectures project then, that was funded by the Leverhulme Trust, sought to understand the highly complex information structures of the catalogues and the way that their structure and content related to the world from which the catalogues were assembled. So a core aim then of our research project of the Leverhulme funded research project was to examine what we call these information architectures. And so we set about doing something that's, absolutely standard in digital humanities. So we had the catalogues triple keyed. We experimented also with Transcribus and some HTR approaches. And then we set about encoding we did our document analysis, and then we set about encoding the catalogues in line with TEI. So this slide gives you an indication of, we encoded a number of features. We were especially interested in, I guess, the entities of which the catalogues were comprised. And this gives you an indication of the type of information content we were encoding. So this is from one of the bibliographical manuscripts. So we were looking at author, publication place, text, and so on. The manuscripts that we looked at went all the way from manuscripts listing Sloane's manuscript collection, manuscripts about manuscripts, nicely meta, to the miscellanies, so where there's a very wide range of materials. So it's especially on this paper and the work we did on this paper that I'm going to tell you about now. So basically, while Sloane's catalogues record a number of objects in great detail, there is a marked lack of provenance information in his catalogues, especially as it pertains to the routes through which some objects made their way into the collection, through whose hands they passed, their exact origins, and the means by which they were acquired is only sporadically documented. So it has been argued by James Delburgo that Sloane acted as a centre point around which his collection was built and organised by a network of lesser known and now largely forgotten individuals. And many of these individuals, we expect, would have been enslaved people in either in the Jamaican plantations that Sloane partly owned through his wife, or other enslaved individuals who, in one way or another, either through either objects were extracted from them or knowledge that then made its way into the catalogues. So those individuals are very, very, if ever, rarely named in the catalogues, and just a few references to them exist. But the agency of these now largely absent individuals in the catalogues should not be underestimated, because following Delburgo's argument, they were often the driving forces behind Sloane's collecting, without whose tastes, interests, knowledge, expertise, Sloane's collection would have been much reduced. Yet while much scholarship has focused on recovering, or more modestly acknowledging, the vast network of individuals who helped Sloane build, organise and document his collection, we still have only a very rough picture of the many individuals behind his collection and the circumstances of their involvement. So this is, if we were to take a sort of a very simple, I guess, if we were to do a very simple textual analysis of the individuals who are named in this case, it's the miscellanies catalogue, we would get this list of Dr. Waldo, Dr. Kempfer, and so on. But those, while those individuals are named and are prominent in the catalogues, they are very far from the full picture of the many individuals who actually would have contributed or from whom information or objects would have been extracted from, and they are as such invisible in the catalogues. So the issue is especially important because those absent voices, those missing individuals, were a part of Sloane's network due to the growth of global trade and imperial expansion and the forms of colonialism of which Sloane was a part, having married into a plantation-owning family. While Sloane displayed few social limits, collaborating with a network of individuals beyond Europe, he very much remained silent about the enslaved, coerced, or unremunerated efforts of many people from colonial contexts who had helped him build his collection. So personal names are then a feature of Sloane's text that we sought to encode, just as we saw in many of the presentations this morning. We looked into NER methods to automatically identify the names, and then we sought to encode those individual names in line with the text encoding initiative. But as we worked through this process, we started to think more and more about those individuals who are not named in the catalogues, who are not included in the catalogues. Those individuals' names may be absent, but an echo of their agency and a trace of their presence is in some nebulous way enfolded into the catalogues. After all, the existence of an object in Sloane's collection indicates that it was worked, made, sold, and or transported. And this is maybe not entirely true for natural items, but they're certainly transported. So as we worked, I began to conceptualize those nameless individuals as presences who haunt the catalogues, in the sense that they participate in a dialectic of trace and absence that is detectable only from certain viewpoints. And they're rarely anchorable to a specific location in the catalogue. But I asked myself, how can we encode the ghosts and the haunting of an early modern archival document? Because encoders can usually tag an individual only if the individual is somehow there in some kind of a concrete or anchorable way in a text. For example, if they're textually embodied in a personal name or in a metaphor. Though in some cases it might be possible to view an object name or a category of knowledge as a proxy for the presence of these invisible individuals, this would require fundamental long-term research, and in many cases it's not going to result in either clear-cut identifications, and also it's not going to allow us to restore the identity of those individuals to the catalogues. So it was really in this process of thinking through how absence and absent individuals and groups can be modelled and encoded in catalogues that I was alerted to, I suppose, how positivist some of our digital humanities approaches, including TEI, can be. So if a feature is present and recognised by an encoder, then they can tag it directly or with standoff markup and proceed to study that textual feature in various ways. But what can be done when an anchor point can't be found? When an absence is technically or textually unmoored? And what can be done when we suspect that a milestone in a catalogue should be associated with an individual, but their identity and even the nature of their presence in that catalogue is unknown and probably will remain so? So the questions might seem to be quite abstruse, but of course there's much at stake in them. The individuals who contributed objects and knowledge to Sloane's catalogues were part of his network, as I've said, due to the growth of global trade and imperial expansion and the forms of colonialism of which Sloane was a part, having married into a plantation-owning family. That these individuals were omitted from Sloane's catalogues is arguably crucial to understanding the sociocultural and the economic context of his collecting, along with the hierarchies of esteem and knowledge that his collecting practice participated in, and even ideologies of race that overarched his documentation and practices of attribution. The absences in Sloane's catalogues are caused not only by personal, but surely also societal and ideological biases of data selection, and further informed by imperatives for that data to inform to taxonomies of collection. The absences in Sloane's catalogues thus speak to the inherent subjectivities of data collection and documentation, whether it's analog or digital, early modern or present, and they remind us of Johanna Drucker's call for, I quote, the concept of data as a given to be rethought through a humanistic lens and characterized as capta, taken and constructed. So the absences also raise crucial questions about the extent to which subjectivities continue to shape data-driven approaches to the analysis of digitized documents. Though perhaps for different reasons, the positivist orientation of TEI and other XML-based languages to model Sloane's catalogues risk, even, albeit unwittingly, do risk the further perpetuation of historical absences, and indeed their activation and their amplification in new ways as historical data sets are made machine readable and are combined and recombined in new systems and applications, between which all manner of interconnection can be built and all manner of inference derived. So 2 questions then follow. How might we use digital tools to recover or to contest rather than re-encode absences in early modern documents, be them Sloane's or others? And from a broader perspective, what steps might be taken to gain deeper understandings of how data-driven approaches to historical documents might not perpetuate the silence of individuals who have already been marginalized in historical records? So, to start thinking through these very big questions that I don't suppose we're ever going to answer, but we certainly will raise and explore and continue to problematize. In order to help us to think about these questions in more concrete ways, we carried out a fairly broad ranging survey of the relevant humanities and archival turn literature on absence. And I do want to make clear here that the questions that I'm proposing, of course, speak to a recent drive in humanities, in digital humanities, more generally towards conceptualizing absence in the digital age, but they very much take inspiration from long-standing humanities debates. For example, the archival turn, which has really shown us that archives are constructed windows into personal and collective processes. And this, I would suggest, is another interesting aspect of this sort of greater unfolding of humanities methods into the digital humanities, or unfolding the human into the digital humanities, because I think that that sense of the digital humanities being a much longer humanities trajectory is beginning to get stronger, whereas previously, from some perspectives, we might have seen digital humanities maybe as somewhat of a breakage with the humanities. But that, certainly to me, that viewpoint is not so much the case anymore. So before I get distracted, before I go off on a complete tangent, I'm going to just tell you about the findings of this survey we did, and I want to, in the process, bring some really exemplary research to your attention. So my colleague Alexandra and I, when we did this survey, we found, we identified 5 main trends in digital approaches to recovering archival silences. So perhaps the most popular method is the use of network analysis. And this approach has the potential to recover individuals with strong connections or who act as important hubs in networks. These individuals may have been treated as invisible or lesser known figures when investigated with canonical approaches and canonical lenses. So the network analysis approach has been taken by many projects, but especially the one that I'm going to mention now is OSEC Early Washington DC Law and Family Project, which, I quote, explores multi-generational Black, white and mixed family networks in early Washington DC by collecting, digitizing, making accessible and analyzing thousands of case files from the Circuit Court for the District of Columbia, Maryland State Courts and the US Supreme Court. And in these networks, we see not only the history of slavery and visualized, but also the networks and relationships of enslaved and free people helps to communicate slavery as a lived experience, and more than a system. So this returns very much to the text that we looked at by Vincent Brown, for example, when he talked about this effective and imaginative and creative engagement that digital tools can help to unlock when used conscientiously. So connected to this is the investigations into how absences themselves might be visually communicated. So the Stanford Center for Spatial and Textual Analysis, CESTA, has focused on developing tools to identify absences in data like Breve, which was especially designed for very incomplete and messy data. And Kirk has also explored the challenges of displaying nothing and how to produce visualizations where, I quote, what is not happening is just as relevant as what is. Connected to this is the creation of databases which aim to make visible forgotten or neglected individuals or sources, especially in colonial contexts, to a large degree historical recovery projects. The linked open data platform Enslaved, the People of the Historic Slave Trade, which facilitates searches across multiple online databases and provides data visualization tools to create maps, charts, and graphs, likewise aims to recover and preserve data about enslaved people for future generations. Topic modeling, text mining, and bibliometrics have also been used to recover absences in existing large-scale digital corpora. So in the study of the Ottoman Algerian women, Ashley Sanders Garcia has been using text mining and named entity recognition in the work of decolonizing the archive and repositioning women within the historical narrative. And finally, the last in this five-fold taxonomy that I've been setting out, I'll turn to scholars who've been overlayering conceptual and diverse digital approaches to address and explore missing data. So in her exploration of the intrinsic issues of archival absence in the antebellum period through the database for the papers of Thomas Jefferson, Lauren Klein has demonstrated how, I quote, a set of techniques that derive from the fields of computational linguistics and data visualization help render visible the archival silences implicit in our understanding of chattel slavery today. And Klein uses a named entity recognizer and co-appearance analysis to reveal the complex relationships between individuals and across social groups. So if I guess the diversity of these approaches tell us anything, it is that we're unlikely to find a one-size-fits-all solution that will help us to sensitively and critically and ethically deal with the absences in the Sloane catalogues. And I very much expect that it will be in a blending of these digital approaches that we will hopefully find some answers. But in case it seems that I'm discounting TEI entirely, I'm not. At the same time, I'm not trying to. Absolutely, I'm not trying to do this. So let me mention some preparatory work that we started actually before I wrote the new proposal. So what I've called the positivist limitations of TEI notwithstanding, the markup that we did apply to name and place name in the catalogues has enabled us to extract large amounts of data about Sloane's socially and geographically vast network. From just 2 catalogues, we extracted the names of about 3,000 people in 600 geographical locations, which work towards providing us with a more quantitatively precise of the declared spread of the geographic network. And it's been very fascinating to see just how few of these individuals can be found in authoritative name entity lists like VIAF. So yes, while we have been working on the presumption that the majority of the people who would be named in the catalogues will be very much powerful people, we do find at the same time that they're not maybe powerful in the sense that means that they've been recorded by something like VIAF, which may record people when they made publications in the early modern period, for example. Again, we find this interweaving of the choices that are made at the point of collection as we explored in the readings. So while this approach does not recover the specific individuals whose identities were left unrecorded, by securing a clearer picture of the geographical spread of the network and considering, for example, collocations of people and places in colonial contexts, we hope that this may lead to working hypotheses about persons and places absent in the network, or indeed indicators of absence that might be further investigated with other approaches. So as I said, the new project is going to experiment with a number of approaches to help us to respond to these profound questions about, not necessarily profound in the sense of that I'm saying they're so smart, but I mean profound as in profoundly important in terms of, ethically using these sources. So as I said, I think there's going to be we'll take a blend of digital approaches to this. But what I want to turn to now is to say that our project is not only focusing on the digital domain and on the digital approaches, even though I hope it will contribute to digital epistemology, but we have put a participatory research methodology at the center of our project design. So the Sloane Lab will aim to start working through the challenges that I've outlined to you through an approach that starts from learning what diverse people, expert communities and heritage institutions with different interests, concerns and knowledge actually want from a digital collection. Through a collaborative design approach, we will involve a range of actors in the co-design, co-testing and co-exploration of the Sloane Lab. So the Sloane Lab is going to be the main output of the project. And in a moment, I'll just say a little bit more about what we think the Sloane Lab will look like. And we're going to do this through open calls to local and community groups in London and the UK, and with a small budget of our funds for international outreach. And then we will hold workshops and focus groups extended with interviews and questionnaires and other research methods as necessary to investigate how interested communities and heritage organisations wish to engage with collections in ways that matter to them. So we hope that we will be able to include and work with communities like the British Caribbean, British African and British Asian communities who may wish to use the Sloane collection to explore narratives of colonialism, power, representation and identity. So for example, if Sloane's catalogues contain objects and knowledge that may have been extracted from the ancestors of these communities without attribution, how can we acknowledge this in a digital national infrastructure? So we hope that the inclusion of previously excluded communities will also allow previously excluded worldviews, epistemologies and knowledge to be integrated in and represented in the digital national collection. Having said that, I'm also quite mindful of the text from Carter that we spoke of earlier, where he theorized the power of silence and the choice of choosing not to speak, actually also as an act of power and an act of resistance. We also hope to work with communities like life scientists, for example, who may wish to view and model Sloane's plant specimens as biological, each providing evidence of a particular genotype at a particular place and a particular time, while also recognizing Sloane's collection to be of wider social and cultural interest. So the question that we would ideally work through with our research-based communities is how we can build a digital collection that somehow restores the multifocality of objects, a multifocality that has sometimes inevitably been flattened by in-house cataloguing systems, which of course, as we already anticipated, will privilege a particular disciplinary interest, history, and so on. And we will also share, we will also identify shared areas of concern and possibility with representatives of heritage organizations. So that we can, yes, do this. So absolutely, we want to avoid engaging in a top-down way. We want to engage with heritage institutions from the outset and to involve a wide range of partners into these conversations, and in doing so, help to communicate and to elaborate methodologies for participatory work with digital, national and international collections. So the research capacity unlocked by the project is going to be exemplified in really interesting ways, I hope. So for example, we're going to, we will advertise and pay a fairly generous stipend to what we're calling community fellows in digital collections. So successful fellows will each receive a handsome bursary to undertake 3 months of research or creative engagement with any aspect of the Sloane Lab's digital collections tools and demonstrators. In other words, with the digital collections of Sloane and the types of tools that we will elaborate for studying and engaging with those collections. And we will also work on a touring exhibition that will draw attention to objects that we learn about in the course of the project, using also digital methods and telling some of those, the new stories that we create or discover that would not have been perhaps known otherwise. So moving then from the more conceptual view that I've set out, that I've just set out, I want to summarize the main intended outcomes of the project to ground a bit of what I've been saying. So the main intended outcome is the public-facing open access Sloane Lab, and that's going to include the data. So the data is basically Sloane's catalogues, whether they're early modern or the data pertaining to the present day cataloguing systems. Also the tools, the digital tools for exploring the catalogues, and then services that will support cross-collection search and the digitally augmented exploration and reuse of digital cultural heritage collections. So we think that the Sloane Lab will have a search face to the reunified present-day collections, historical catalogues and external resources, the content, tools, and then documentation covering the uses of the data, like schemas and the licensing details, and then also an engagement demonstrator that can hopefully support use of the Sloane Lab beyond the immediate triangle of the British Museum, Natural History Museum and British Library. So we have a very challenging 3 years ahead of us. I don't underestimate the work that's going to be involved to any extent. But I think that the exciting thing and the potential of this digital humanities research, I expect it to be really demonstrated and realized by the act of putting humans at the center of it all, both the historical individuals who have been invisibilized in the catalogues and whose presence raises profound questions about how text analysis and other computational approaches cannot or can avoid re-perpetuating bias, and also in the present day sense of putting humans at the center of the research through the use of participatory methodologies and ways of working to perhaps supplement, extend or further problematize the historical record, or interweave it with present day stories that can help us to think about the past and computational approaches to it in a way that places digital ethics in a very prominent spot in what we're doing. As I said, the reality is that, of course, the identity of some of these people whose knowledge and agency shape the catalogues and Sloane's collecting process, they're not going to be recovered. Let's not pretend otherwise, or few of them would be recovered. But I suppose the point is, it's a broader point. It's how do we acknowledge that that absent voices is going to be almost a fact. It's going to be a through line of most data collections, and to think through computational responses and ethical responses to this. So let me conclude then by returning to the beginning of my talk, where I claimed that those questions of absence, subjectivity, and bias are very important problems, or what I'm here calling a grand challenge for digital humanities and humanities data science as the field is now emerging. So I wish to, as I said, I'm going to just return to this claim and explain to you why it is that I believe that it's a grand challenge for us. So those questions of absence, subjectivity, and bias that I have explored are challenges because they require us to work absolutely in an interdisciplinary way as historians, as digital humanists, as computer scientists, as data scientists, as cultural historians, and so on. And it enables us to come together to investigate how we can ensure marginalized voices are not lost or buried deeper as cultural norms and biases become embedded into digitized data and information is selected or wrangled to conform to models of collection, or even just hidden in plain sight by this huge abundance of digital data that we are surrounded by. The historical, social, and political importance of recovering the role played by undocumented individuals in the development of Hans Sloane's catalogues is manifest. But allied to this is the urgency that such questions take on in the age of humanities, data science, and digital humanities. As I said, as our collections move from, to paraphrase Nina von Tielstrup a little bit, she talks about this move from boundary objects to interconnected and interrelated sets of data and further, on which further digital technologies are brought to bear, transforming them in ways that we can't predict. So Sloane's collections and the questions of computational approaches to absence and bias, I think, speak to some of the most important agendas of these fields, as my colleagues and I argued in a recent position paper for the UK's Turing Institute for Data Science, where we said incorporating new computational, quantitative, and data-driven approaches in humanities research, in the way humanities research is conducted, requires us to articulate and to rethink the whole research process in new ways. So perhaps paradoxically then, the emphasis on absence, such as I have put it here, forces us to then confront the presence and the continuities in our own analog and digital research processes, which can further re-amplify those processes, and which have global reach and potential, even if they're shaped by situated contexts and histories. Sloane recorded his objects and catalogues for his own use and for his contemporaries' use. While he anticipated the use of his collection by the public in leaving it to the nation, I don't think he could ever have imagined how his catalogues would be interrogated. Similarly, we cannot foresee the uses of our data sets, a reality that requires careful planning to ensure that our intentions for the data and our choices and our rationale in data selection are made explicit. So it's not that we can control the uses, but surely this thinking through, or what are those indicators of situatedness that we need to bundle with the data and include with the data are crucially important. And moreover, the absences in Sloane's catalogues raise questions regarding the ethics of digital humanities scholarship, and where there is a duty to investigate or at least alert the reader and the users to the uses of the data and to data absences, especially considering the well-accepted views regarding the perpetuation of subjectivities by digital tools and archives. And I understand that this could quickly become sort of an exercise in absurdity, you know, so how could we list every absence from the data, for example? At the same time, I think there is a question about the communicating the importance of the point of collection, for example, as we saw in our readings this morning, and how digital humanities takes this up in a complex way that's not only communicated by humans, but that's also made machine readable. So in this way, as I hope I have convinced you, Sloane's catalogues can be seen as a rich and as a complex testing ground, not only for digital humanities approaches to the history of collections and early modern studies, but also for the wide potential transferability of the results of our work to many present-day fields that aim to find patterns in, or to make sense of, the large, complex, and often disjointed data sets that are either digitized or automatically generated or mashed up or whatever it is through all manner of processes in our information age. Present-day digital humanities, science and humanities are interdependent, and it's only by working together that we may better understand the way that Sloane and his contemporaries made knowledge and understood the world through objects and collections, and likewise how we do this, not only with objects and collections, but also with data. Thank you very much.